In the summer of 1921, a fire broke out in the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. The official reports described it as a minor incident, contained quickly, damage limited. What those reports did not emphasize, what almost no mainstream historical account bothers to dwell on, is that the room most affected by that fire contained the schedules from the 1890 United States Census. Not summaries, not copies. The original population schedules, handwritten page by page, county by county, name by name, recording over 63 million Americans who had been counted, documented, and verified as existing in this country at a specific moment in time. After the fire, most of those records were gone. And then, in 1932, the Census Bureau made a decision that still does not make complete sense if you look at it long enough. They ordered the remaining damaged schedules, the ones that had survived the fire, to be destroyed, deliberately, by official order, which means that whatever the fire did not take, the government finished. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the 1890 census was not just any census. It was the first census conducted after the official end of Reconstruction. It was the first census that would have captured in full detail the stabilized records of formerly enslaved people who had been free for 25 years. It was the first census that would have documented in precise numbers the land ownership, the household composition, the occupational status, and the geographic distribution of an entire generation of Black Americans who had been born free, raised free, and were in 1890 building lives that the documentary record should have preserved forever. And it is gone, almost entirely gone. What survived covers less than 1% of the original population schedules. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what a census schedule actually was in 1890. This was not a simple head count. The 1890 census asked for name, age, sex, color, citizenship status, occupation, whether the person owned or rented their home, whether the home was mortgaged, the number of years the person had been married, the number of children born, the number of children still living, the birthplace of each parent, whether the person could read and write, all and whether the person had suffered from certain diseases. For families trying today to trace their ancestry, that document would have been the bridge. It sits exactly between the 1880 census, which many researchers have accessed, and the 1900 census, which survived intact. The 20 years between 1880 and 1900 were the exact decades in which land was acquired, families were formed, children were born, and futures were being written. And the record of those 20 years, for 63 million people, does not exist. There is a version of this story that presents the destruction as unfortunate but innocent. The fire was an accident. The subsequent destruction was a bureaucratic decision based on limited storage space and the belief that damaged records were not worth preserving. That is the version most history textbooks offer when they mention it at all. But the more you look at the sequence of events, the harder it becomes to accept the innocent version as complete. Consider the timing. The 1890 census was completed, and the schedules were stored in 1890. They remained in storage for over 30 years without incident. The fire occurred in 1921, the same year that also saw some of the most intense racial violence in American history, including the destruction of the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, an event now known as the Tulsa Race Massacre, where a prosperous Black community was burned to the ground and its property records became deeply contested. The 1921 fire in Washington was small. The building did not burn down. Other records in the same building survived, but the 1890 census schedules did not. Then consider what happened next. The surviving damaged schedules were not immediately destroyed. They sat in the National Archives for over a decade. During that decade, archivists had the opportunity to microfilm them, as was being done with other fragile documents at the time. Microfilming technology existed. It was being used. The decision was made not to film the 1890 schedules before destroying them. The destruction order came in 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression, a period when millions of Americans were fighting legal battles over land rights, inheritance claims, and property ownership, many of which depended on documentary evidence of who had owned what and when. The 1890 census would have been among the most powerful tools available to establish those claims. And in 1932, the government destroyed what remained of it. Now, I kept asking myself whether this was pattern recognition or paranoia, whether I was connecting events that had no real connection. So I started looking at what other records were disappearing in the same period. What I found did not calm that question. Between 1890 and 1935, an extraordinary number of county-level land records in the former Confederate states were damaged, lost, misfiled, or destroyed. The reasons given vary: floods, fires, courthouse relocations, clerical errors. In county after county across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisiana, the records that documented land transfers from 1865 to 1900, the exact years when formerly enslaved people were acquiring land, are incomplete, corrupted, or simply absent. This is not one fire. This is not one courthouse. This is a pattern across a region over a specific period of time, and it follows a specific demographic line. The Freedmen's Bureau had kept records. Between 1865 and 1872, the Bureau documented labor contracts, land transactions, marriage registrations, and family reunification efforts involving hundreds of thousands of Black Americans in the South. Those records are extraordinary. Researchers who have accessed them describe the sensation of suddenly seeing people who were invisible in official records, named, documented, their intentions and their lives recorded in detail. But the Bureau was shut down in 1872, and many of its local records were either not transferred to federal custody or were transferred in ways that left them scattered and difficult to access. The window between the Bureau's closure and the 1890 census was supposed to be filled by the census itself. The census was supposed to be the next layer of documentation, and then the census was gone. What does it mean when a government loses the documentation of 63 million of its own citizens and then destroys what little survived? When you look at it from the perspective of a descendant trying to trace a family line, it means hitting a wall that does not feel like accident. It means finding your great-great-grandmother in the 1880 census, finding her name again in a church record from 1895, and finding nothing in between. It means knowing she existed, knowing she had children, knowing she may have owned land or had legal standing in her community. Oh, and knowing that the record of those years was taken from you before you were born. This is not a metaphorical erasure. The document was there, the government held it, and then it was gone. There are small exceptions. 11 states have partial surviving schedules from 1890 covering fragments of certain counties. Veterans' schedules survived in better condition because they were stored separately. Researchers have spent decades using city directories, church records, tax rolls, and state-level documents to reconstruct what the census would have contained. But reconstruction is not the same as preservation. A reconstructed record tells you what someone guessed or inferred. An original schedule tells you what a census enumerator recorded while standing at someone's door. Those are not the same thing. And the difference matters enormously when you are trying to prove a legal claim, establish a lineage, or simply know who your people were. I want to be precise about what I am not saying. I am not saying that the fire of 1921 was deliberately set. I am not saying that the destruction order of 1932 was part of a coordinated conspiracy. What I am saying is that the sum of these decisions, taken together, across the period when they occurred, had a specific and measurable effect on specific communities. The families most harmed by the loss of the 1890 census were the families who had the fewest alternative records, the families who had been excluded from property systems, banking systems, and legal systems that would have generated redundant documentation. The families who depended most on the census as their primary official record of existence. And those families were not randomly distributed. They were concentrated among Black Americans, Indigenous Americans, and recent immigrants, the exact populations that were facing the most intense legal and social pressure during the decades that followed. Who authorized the destruction order in 1932, and what arguments were made in favor of it? Why were the 1890 schedules not microfilmed before destruction when other records were being filmed at the same time? What happened to the county-level land records that should have overlapped with the census data and do not? Why does the gap between 1880 and 1900 in so many family trees follow the same demographic lines as the gap in the census itself? How many land claims, inheritance disputes, OL and citizenship questions were decided in the 1930s and 1940s in ways that would have been different if the 1890 census had survived. And how many families today are living with the consequences of a document they never knew they lost, searching for something that was taken from them before they had the language to ask for it? If you have ever tried to trace your family and found that the records simply stop, that the names go quiet right around the 1890s, that land your family spoke about cannot be found in any deed, that people you know existed seem to have no documentary trail, you are not imagining it. You are not doing the research wrong. You are hitting the edges of a deliberate absence. This channel exists for people who are willing to sit with that absence and ask why it is there. If you have felt the specific frustration of a family tree that refuses to go back further than it should, if you have found dates that do not match, names that appear once and then vanish, properties that belong to your people and cannot be traced, you belong here. Subscribing means you will not be doing this work alone. It means someone is investigating alongside you, taking the question seriously, and refusing to accept that the silence is natural, because it is not natural. It was made.